The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the very first day of this quite challenging June sesshin here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, along with some other kind of pandemic that is affecting connectivity. We don't know what it is. Most likely it's thunderstorms and they may have damaged something. But yesterday, just before sitting started, we had an outage of quite some length. And it was of concern whether we actually would be able to go ahead with the Zoom. When it finally came back, and I called Kit Carson Telecom to ask them if they knew what was going on, they said, no, we don't know what's going on. And the poor man sounded terribly flustered. But these things happen. These things happen, and they seem to be happening more and more. There's increasing violence in the world as people get stressed out with the restrictions of the COVID virus. And there's an awful lot of things happening. The sudden upsurge of concern, major concern, because I think there's always been some concern about the killings of Black men, unwittingly or wittingly, by police, and also the number of women that have been sexually abused or harassed throughout the ages by even top-level men. And things are turning around. There's a lot of shifting of consciousness, which is good. It's good. When we can't hang on to the usual, as has been said earlier in the sesshin, then there's an opportunity to break free from the usual, to let go our clinging to it, and to, as a result, walk into a greater awareness, a greater freedom from our stuff, freedom from what's going on. And I always think of Jacques Lusserin, the blind man who was incarcerated in Buchenwald during the Second World War. He was found out to be a real important person in a resistance group that had grown and was highly successful. And he ended up in a hell realm. There's no question about it. Many of us these days can feel like we're in a hell realm. But he ended up with such freedom as a result of not being able to go with his usual perceptions, his usual assumptions of what he needed even. The inmates were ritually starved. They were killed precipitously in various different means. And life was hanging by a thread. Sanity was hanging by a thread in that environment. And while, thankfully, we're not in Buchenwald right now, there's a lot that's going on that is not what people are accustomed to. And it's been going on for long enough that there's real concern about the whole situation, and people are beginning to get quite reactive, unfortunately, because it looks like the virus is here for a while. And in fact, there's definitely an uptick in cases now with the reopening. There are a number of states that are seriously being impacted by increasing numbers of people diagnosed with COVID and people entering hospitals. And in fact, Houston, Texas is extremely concerned about how close they are to hospital overwhelm because of the virus. none of this is entering into anybody's peace of mind in a positive way. It's robbing people of peace of mind unless they have opened to something deeper. And I'd like to share some about this something deeper because we all have it and we all can realize it and we all can become truly liberated, even if we are in the midst of unthinkable chaos, unthinkable restrictions. Because it is a particular aspect of our investment in a self-image that creates the pain and the suffering. And what happened with Jacques was that he was able to let go of that self-image, to let go of what he thought he needed to be happy, to be safe, to survive. And in letting go, he uncovered what was already there and is already there for all of us. And right now is such a pregnant time for uncovering that within ourselves. I'd like to share with you some of the words of Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche. At the very beginning of the COVID-19 shutdown, I sent an email out to people and highly recommended a book by one of his sons, who is also a Tulku being a recognized reincarnation of a previous master. And the man that wrote the book, Mingyur Rinpoche, it's sort of a chronologue of his long-awaited solo pilgrimage throughout India. He had grown up extremely protected. He and his brothers, I think he's got 2 or 3 brothers at least, and they're all known as Tulkus, and they're all eminent teachers in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, including he himself. He has students all over the world, and you can actually watch YouTube videos of his teachings. They're the basic teachings, unless I think you could probably get more advanced teachings if you want to pay. But his father was well known, even in his lifetime, as a deeply realized and an incredible teacher. So, Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, and could we have the lights up a bit, or are they already up?
All the way up.
I wonder, Dale, could you go get the standing light,
Yeah.
please? My vision is so bad these days that it's, or actually, you know what? Trying to think. Maybe a flashlight would be less of a problem because we're going to have to find some place to plug in a lamp. Sorry for the delay, everyone, but there's a lot of light in front of me with the windows, and so it's not so easy to see. Thank you. So this is from a book called As It Is. And it is teachings about how it is with each one of us, for each one of us. We think, we remember, we plan, and the attention thus exerted moves towards an object and sticks to it. This mental movement is called thinking or conceptual mind. And there is a role for thinking. It tends to get a bad rep in Zen practice, but actually thinking is a tool, and it's a very useful tool. The problem is that we are taught to solve every problem in the universe, including who we are, what we are, how we behave, and all the rest of it, through thought. Some of that can be helpful, But rumination is a serious problem. In fact, psychotherapy offers training for clinical people to help clients avoid or limit rumination. This constant yada, 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 yada background noise. And there are so many people that are so accustomed to it that when there is any element of silence, it can be frightening for those people. I've told of years ago when we were part of an AIDS interfaith network when I was at the Rochester Zen Center back in the AIDS crisis. This was a network that was established by the spiritual communities in Rochester, in the greater Rochester area, because there were certain churches apparently were going into the hospital rooms of the men who were dying of AIDS and telling them how they were condemned by God because of their behavior. It's not really helpful to have somebody have those things happen when they're dying of extremely painful conditions. And the rest of the spiritual community had decided that they wanted to be able to offer to anyone impacted by AIDS, whether they had AIDS, HIV, or they were family or friends of people diagnosed, so that they could feel welcome to explore spiritual practice with any of the different spiritual communities in Rochester. And they ranged the gamut. They weren't all Christian by any means. And when they first got started, they decided to do an all-night vigil. And they invited we Buddhists to be part of it. And not knowing very much about Buddhism, they decided that what they would do would be to have scattered through the whole evening, or the whole night actually, a moment of silence, 60 seconds of silence 3 times during that vigil. Not a single time could the person at the front of the group up there in the lectern hold a whole 60 seconds. Within 2 or 3 seconds, feet began to shuffle. You could hear people moving around. People started coughing or shifting. It was obviously very uncomfortable for most of the people there, including the person up at the top leading the group at that particular time, to be silent for just 60 seconds. Of course, we Zen folks are used to being silent, at least externally silent, for hours on end. And our challenge is that internal ongoing chatter. Somewhere along the way, as we begin growing up, we kind of learn to talk to ourselves, and a lot of this inner talk is a repetition of what other people have said to us. And if we've been chastised, then something similar that we do, we will chastise ourselves. We will take on the voice of the authority and give to ourselves internally, whether or not it's going to happen outside. And so it goes. And there's snippets of poems, bits of music, all kinds of internal fragments of conversation that go on in the background of our mind. And it makes us feel like we are alive. To be silent for any extended period of time is discomforting for most people. One of the experiences a friend of mine had when he came to visit when I was at the Rochester Zen Center, and he was there, not actually on the site, but was interacting with people at the center. And he was astounded at how people could be so comfortable with moments of silence, or, more than moments of silence between most groups. If somebody stops speaking, somebody else chimes in. The possibility of having any level of silence is a little bit frightening. It's anxiety producing. Why? Because what did Descartes say? I think, therefore I am. And if I don't think, which can be voiced thinking, as in talk, or it can be yada yada in our head, then are we going to disappear? And as we do our practice, this can feel like dangerously close. Yet allowing ourselves to disappear allows us to enter into a different realm of mind and come to awakening. In fact, it's a prerequisite to coming to awakening. But unless we are profoundly motivated, we go kicking and screaming. We don't want to do it. This is the source of that Zen expression: let go your hold on the cliff and leap, hands held high, into the fiery abyss. That's what it can feel like. I have a Mexican friend, a therapist actually, who had a Kensho experience at a sesshin that I was at in Mexico. And afterwards she said, I honestly thought I was dying. I honestly thought I was dying. If we die before we die, we don't die when we die. I quoted that saying of Shironan earlier today. Letting go, daring to let go of who we think we are, makes an enormous difference. And part of that, letting go, involves walking into the anxiety that's produced as part of that. If we're not who we think we are, then what? So let's continue with Urgyen Rinpoche. So this mental movement is called thinking and conceptual mind. We have many different expressions in Tibetan to describe the functioning of this basic attitude of mind, of this extroverted consciousness, unaware of its own nature. Unaware of its own nature. We think that that's who we are. This ignorance of mind grabs hold of objects, forms concepts about them, and gets involved and caught up in the concepts it's created. This is the nature of samsara, and has been continuing through beginningless lifetimes up to the present moment. This is the nature of suffering, because our thinking drives our emotions, drives our reactivity. And again, thinking isn't bad as such, but when it is assumed to be all powerful, that's where we make a major mistake. And the same way with emotions. We feel, we're human beings, we feel, that's appropriate. But when our emotions are skewed and brought up by thinking that is not accurate, perceptions that are not accurate, we suffer greatly, and we get into reactive stances and can cause ongoing suffering, both for ourselves and for others. And we don't realize that we're caught. It seems totally legitimate, and sometimes it is. And this is our job, is to clarify our mind, to let go increasingly, to see through where we're caught, really, and let go the habit patterns of being caught so that we can discern when it's appropriate to respond, and when we choose not to react. And our life becomes more harmonious, and the circle around us becomes more harmonious as a result as well. It's a long haul. It's a challenging, brave, incredible work. And yet it's essential if we're truly to experience peace. And the thing is, that's our natural way of being. The rest of it is sort of like covering up. I was just reading a recent issue of Science. Well, it was a science, the Smithsonian magazine. And here they're investigating Alexander the Great's father, Philip, because there's an archaeologist who has spent a lifetime, really. She started in her early 20s, and she's in her 50s now, I think, uncovering this massive metropolis that Philip had apparently established in a relatively remote area of Greece. He didn't go to Athens, and he was considered, since he was Macedonian, he was considered a barbarian. But it turns out that was not the case. And she was talking about when they initially found the site. And first they found it because there were some tombs that were revealed. The whole city had been covered by a landslide at some ancient time and obliterated from human sight. But in this more modern era, they discovered the tombs, and some of them had not been pillaged. And then she said 15 feet of digging with tiny little tools, because they didn't want to damage anything they might see. And they finally came to a piece of the part of one of the original main buildings, which was huge. All those years digging patiently, carefully, 15 feet down. And they struck gold, more or less. In fact, they actually did strike gold, because they found a tomb with a golden, it wasn't a sarcophagus, I guess. I don't know the actual term, I'm not familiar with, that was the, where they had buried Philip's ashes. He was murdered. And then Alexander, with his father's army, was able to go and conquer so much of the world. But we're also on archaeological dig. And as cultural anthropologists even, we're exploring our own mind. And it is a phenomenon that is so worth doing. Some more on by Urgyen Rinpoche. All these involvements are merely fabricated creations. They're not the natural state of our mind. They're based on the concepts of subject and object, perceiver and perceived. This dualistic structure, together with the disturbing emotions and the karma that is produced through them, are the forces that drive us from one samsaric experience to another. Yet, all the while, there is still the basic nature, which is not made out of anything whatsoever. This is your original face. This is one of the major breakthrough koans. It is totally unconstructed and empty. And at the same time, it is aware. It has the quality of being able to cognize. This indivisible unity of being empty and cognizant is our original ground that is never lost. And that's what we're digging for in our Zazen archaeological dig. That fundamental ground of being. this place from which, when we live from that place more consciously, I guess you could say, I don't know how to say it, but when we have winnowed out the misconceptions of who we are, and therefore the reactivity that comes from those misconceptions, then this ground of being becomes more and more revealed. And it is so incredibly worth it. He says later, if you took all the money in the whole world and set it in a pile, compared to that worth, opening to this ground of being is far more valuable, and incredibly so. And so this is what we are doing in this sesshin. And I have to apologize to everybody for the fact that those of you who are Zooming were not able to get Sanzen this morning because we simply didn't have any way to do it. There was no connectivity, and we still don't know what's going on, but hopefully they're getting it done. I saw that the connection had also broken just before lunch as well. So far, it appears that it is continuing, at least through this Teisho, and I hope through the rest of Sesshin without fail. And this evening, that you all who are have been patiently waiting will be able to have Sanzen. So we'll stop now and recite the 4 vows. I thank you very much for listening.